Rotorua is enjoying the high season for its visitor industry. It's mid-January 2001 and already the year is looking very good indeed. The Rotorua Daily Post has reported on another trouble-free New Year's Eve as the city welcomed what some purists were calling the real beginning of the new millennium. Despite inclement weather, a well-behaved crowd of 12,000 welcomed the new year at the lakefront. With the holiday season getting into full swing, another positive post headline enthuses that this could be our best year ever. And that's not just for the city folks. Out in the countryside, there are developments putting a smile on farmers' faces. This year's record milk solids payout of $4.50 a kilogram represents a regional economic windfall of more than $100 million. But this Daily Post editorial is less dewy-eyed about the work ahead needed for a successful 2001. Top of the wish list is a demand to get cracking on the airport runway lengthening at least to Trans-Tasman standard. And running a close second, a workable plan to provide Rotorua with a continuing credible rail link for freight and passengers. In a more charitable frame of mind, the Daily Post might have pointed out the number of projects almost reaching their fruition. The International Stadium grandstand rebuild, still on deadline for a March completion. The Rotorua Boys High School Student Millennium Centre, almost finished. As is the big new Student Services building going up at Wairiki Institute of Technology. But it seems there is to be little rest for Mayor Hall and his district councillors if for no other reason than 2001 happens to be a local body election year. And there are plenty of issues for those with political aspirations or an axe to grind. First out of the headline starting blocks comes the hardy annual of council red tape holding up local development. Historically, it has been the Rotorua Chamber of Commerce which has issued regular complaints.
I guess most of the Chamber at that stage were talking about subdivisions and the fact that we had town planning issues that I guess they were saying it was taking too long, there was too much churn within council, we were too tough, and the Chamber were complaining that it wasn't really a level playing field. And we took notice of that, to be honest.
The simple fact is that the council administration of many mundane matters does appear to have been slowing up. At the opening years of the 21st century, the rapidly developing business technology is causing the RDC to creak. The buck for bureaucratic delays generally ends on the city manager's desk, and Ted Hansen remembers it like this.
When I started, a lawyer would write in and say, we're going to settle on a property in a week's time, next Friday. Could you tell us by Wednesday if there's any rates outstanding? And we would do that in a letter form. And a few years later, we would get would come in and it would be a fax. And so in the morning would be a fax which say, we're going to settle in 2 days' time. Could you get us a fax information? So, that shortened the process. And then I think we got, it was sort of getting down to an email. We're settling, 8 o'clock in the morning. We're settling at lunchtime. Can you tell me by 11:30 whether there's any rates owing or anything outstanding? So your whole file system, had to change to be able to produce information in 3 hours that you used to have 3 days to go find.
But at the start of 2001, the criticism is being levelled by one of Rotorua's tourism whiz-kids, Mike Tamaki. For Rotorua, the flamboyant Tamaki brothers Mike and Doug and their Tamaki Tours has been one of the great success stories of the late 1990s.
There was no strategy. I think the boys did it purely by being, you look up a grassroots definition of innovation and just get in and do it, and there'd be a picture of Mike and Doug in the dictionary. They just have a drive to do what hadn't been done. They had a gut instinct, and then Mike had the words to convince his brother to sell his bike so that they could invest and get into it.
Despite having to bus their clientele 20 kilometres south of town to Tumanui, Tamaki Tours have built their popularity on a new format for the traditional hotel-based Hangian concert.
Desserts for this evening.
But now their city headquarters on the corner of Fenton and Pukaki streets is just too small. The plan of acquiring and converting the old Orchid Garden premises in Hinamaru Street has brought Tamaki Tours head-to-head with council bureaucracy and a time-consuming world of building regulations, resource consents and, well, yes, red tape. Welcome, Tamaki brothers, to the world of the property developer. So far, this has been a summer of music. There's even a group of South American buskers bringing an international flavour to the central business district. This year, the Lakeside concert had featured special guests backed by the Auckland Symphony Orchestra, playing music from split ends. Also in January and away from the lakefront, at Rotorua Marae, Opera in the Pa. Music from the classics with a Polynesian flavour. there is nothing musical about the loudest sound of the month of January. Heard in Kuarau Park on the afternoon of the 26th. More than 100 spectators in and around the park are startled, then excited by one of the largest hydrothermal explosions ever seen in Rotorua. Mud and rocks from the spectacular event are blasted 200 metres into the air. With the proximity of the event to both the hospital and the aqua centre, emergency services are quickly activated, but only a clean-up operation is necessary on the roadway, while the amount of debris around the rescue helicopter's hospital base provides a good idea of the force of the explosion. Rotorua has just produced its newest tourist attraction. Within days, hundreds are turning up to view the aftermath of this blast in the park, and both local papers go to some lengths to get interesting views of the phenomenon. All this is good for business, but again this summer, burgeoning visitor numbers means a rise in reported crime. However, this time there is a difference. Petty juvenile crime is noticeably also on the increase, with buildings in the city area and the suburbs disfigured by graffiti. Once again, staffing levels and a perceived absence of an obvious presence on local streets leads to questions about the state of the district's policing. At public meetings, Mayor Hall admits that as far as juvenile crime is concerned, there is no quick fix, and longer-term solutions need to be found. So is the answer to the rising overall crime level just a numbers game?
I wanted community policing, and it was against the model that they were seeing as the new contemporary rapid response model, and I thought it was a nonsense. And I still do. I just think we needed to have the police on the beat.
But police search and rescue expert Senior Sergeant Dave Donaldson can point to many specialist commitments that make demands on the force in Rotorua over and above local policing.
Rotorua is always being a sort of a central headquarters station, has always had specialist squads who had a big time commitment to specialist training and to call-outs. And so those officers work long hours, and accordingly they clock up overtime, and they have to have their time off and get their breaks, or they just crack up. So that's always been a burden that the Rotorua Police have had to carry. And more recently, there's been the overseas deployments. So I know that the Rotorua Police have had a big commitment to the Solomons and to East Timor. Even Ray Sutton, our former area commander, he was up in Timor right at the hot part of the hostilities up there. So he was away from his post quite often.
Ongoing high public interest has also been expressed in the future of Rotorua's rail link. Since the proposed sale of the line and others around the country was announced by Transrail last October, wide agitation has continued to find a solution that will preserve the rail option. So far over summer, numbers using the service have been good. After an initial half-hearted response to the idea, both Mayor Hall and local MP Steve Chadwick have swung their support behind retention of the rail link with a series of meetings.
I think it was after the meeting with Transrail that he just thought, look, we've got to do this.
We did a lot of work with the regional council here, and I went to several meetings in Waikato and in Auckland to see if we can get some synergy going between all of our cities, our three cities, and Tauranga through the Kaimais, to see if we can get some synergy going to make it work.
We never really got the tourism sector on board with this. It remained the train enthusiasts, but Graham did do his bit.
The idea was right, but the execution of it was always going to be a frustrating exercise.
It just, timing wasn't right, perhaps.
The days of the Kotu station and its sole employee indeed seem to be numbered. Rotorua's newspapers are not just about attention-grabbing front-page headlines. Both carry many stories which could be termed matters of public record. The Post has daily births and death notices. Both papers note reunions, golden wedding anniversaries, and on occasion especially mark the passing of significant Rotorua citizens by way of an obituary.
Who got to write the obituaries?
I did, generally speaking, and probably for that reason that I'm was an older person and had longer contact with these people. Obituaries aren't a young person's thing. Young people don't look at death. It's a long way in the future.
In February, the Daily Post carries the obituary for Doug Fenwick, who for years played a prominent part in the growth of the city. In 2001, there would be many now who would be unaware of his pioneering role in the development of what is now the upmarket suburb of Linmore. On occasional visits back to the scene of his upbringing, Doug's son, Terry Fenwick, not only catches up with old mates, but is able to recall a time when much of the surrounding area was still farmland, originally owned by the Lewis family.
My mum and dad decided that this suburb had the potential for growth, and they were looking at setting up a grocer's shop. And so they bought where we stand now, a third of an acre, and at that stage this area was known as Lewis Hill, not Linmore. So Dad wanted to set up a grocer's shop in an area that had no sealed roads, no street lighting, no telephones, no bus services, no schools, and everyone said he should be committed. But however, they progressed. When they got close to opening, he wanted to incorporate a post office and certainly a public telephone that people could come and use in the area. And when he discovered that Lewis Hill was already registered as a name in the South Island as a postal area, they couldn't use it. So he travelled to Hamilton and met with the postmaster there, and between them and Mum, they picked out the name of Linmore, and so that's how Linmore, as we know it, became as Linmore suburb. So in 1949, in July, they opened their shop, which was a grocer shop here, selling groceries, bread, milk, ice creams, and the population grew as they grew. There were areas of Rotorua that were growing at the same time, but I think Linmore had this feel about it that in years to come it would be a suburb that people would like to be a part of, and from those very early stages things developed to the point where people wanted to come. The shop became the meeting point for all the housewives in the area, and they would congregate and have their chats. And it also became the centre for the local Ratepayers Association, and they held their meetings in this shop. And from the meetings that they held, they progressed the area to the point where people wanted to come. Dad was the one that would fix the lawnmowers. He was always a go-to man in the community if they needed something done. And with the strong families that were coming into the area as well, collectively, I think this pushed the suburb out front to say this really was a very special place to live. And for kids growing up like me, it was just fantastic.
As with obituaries, our local newspapers carry many stories on their inside pages that are hardly sensational, but nevertheless chart the process of civic change. Rightly considered the birthplace of the New Zealand exotic forest industry and adjacent to the Whakarewarewa forest it helped establish, the Forest Research Institute has long been considered one of Rotorua's gems. Roadways through the park-like setting of the FRI grounds have long been used as a pleasant alternative public access to the redwood forest. Now at the end of February 2001, Rotorua loses the shortcut and the recreational pleasures of the grounds of the Forest Research Institute. Electronic gates and kilometres of security fence are installed to counter growing incidences of theft and vandalism. Some unkinder souls suggest these new arrangements might actually be designed to keep the FRI boffins in rather than to keep the public out. Sadly, the fact remains, this new exclusion zone is a salutary reminder of our changing times.